The transport shuttle shook hard as it docked with Koreth Prime. Revak Castillo grabbed the overhead bar and held on while the metal walls groaned around her. Through the small window, she could see the orbital station spinning slowly against a field of stars. It was enormous. Ring after ring of steel and glass, all connected by bridges that glowed faint blue in the dark of space. She was the only one standing in the shuttle. Every other seat was empty. Earth had been given one spot at the Crucible, and she was it. One human among 60 alien warriors from across the galactic conquered. The airlock hissed open and the smell hit her first. Hot metal and something sharp like burnt copper. The gravity was lighter here than on Earth, just enough to make her feel like she might float with every step. She adjusted quickly. She had trained for this. The docking corridor was wide and gray. 2 armed guards stood at the far end. They were Gorvon, massive creatures, nearly 8 feet tall, with thick brown skin that looked like tree bark. They watched her pass with small, dark eyes and said nothing. Beyond them, the Crucible opened up. It was nothing like the pictures in the briefing files. The main hall was a vast open space carved from the station's inner ring. Training arenas lined the walls, separated by energy barriers that shimmered like heat waves. Above them, viewing platforms circled the room in tiers. Hundreds of cadets moved through the space, and not one of them looked human. Reva saw Droshek, tall reptilian beings with green and black scales that covered their entire bodies. Their eyes were gold and slitted, and they moved with a smooth, dangerous confidence. She saw Chelin, thin insectoid creatures with 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected the light. She saw species she had no name for. Some had fur. Some had shells. Some seemed to be made of something that was not quite flesh and not quite stone. All of them were bigger than her. All of them carried weapons. Reva carried a bag over her shoulder and a blade on her hip. A tone sounded across the hall, and the cadets began to gather near a raised platform at the center. Reva followed the crowd and found a place near the back. The platform was occupied by a single figure, a tall, scarred creature with pale blue skin and white eyes that had no pupils. This was Commandant Saith, of Valori, and the head of the Crucible. She spoke in a voice that was calm and cold. "You are here because your worlds believe you are worthy. The Crucible does not care what your worlds believe. You will prove your worth here, or you will leave. There is no middle ground." She paused and let the silence sit. Then she stepped aside, and another figure took her place. He was Droshek, but larger than any of the others Reva had seen. 7 feet tall, with scales so dark they were almost black. His arms were thick with muscle, and across his chest he wore ceremonial armor polished warplate that gleamed under the lights. His name was Blademaster Torvek Jal, and he was the senior weapons instructor. "Cadets," he said. His voice was deep and rough like gravel dragged across stone. "You will now present your weapons for registration. Step forward when called." One by one, the cadets approached the table at the front of the platform. Each one placed their weapon down for inspection. Reva watched carefully. A Gorvon set down a gravity hammer so heavy it dented the table. A Droshek cadet presented a plasma glaive that hummed with blue energy. A Chelin placed 2 hard light blades that flickered like trapped lightning. Every weapon had a power source. Every weapon glowed or hummed or crackled with energy. Then they called her name. "Castillo, Terran delegation." She walked forward. The crowd parted slightly, not out of respect but out of curiosity. She was small by their standards, 5'6". Brown skin, dark hair pulled back tight. She wore standard-issue cadet fatigues that were slightly too big because they did not make them in human sizes. She reached the table and drew her blade. It was a falcata, a curved, single-edged sword with a forward-weighted blade about 20 inches long. The steel was dark, almost gray, with faint lines running through it where the metal had been folded during forging. The handle was wrapped in old leather, worn smooth by years of use. There was no power cell, no energy signature, no glow. She placed it on the table. Torvik looked at it. He picked it up with one clawed hand and turned it over slowly. He held it up to the light. Then he looked at Riva. And he laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was a full, barking sound that came from deep in his chest, and it echoed off the walls of the hall. His gold eyes squeezed shut, and his teeth, rows of sharp, interlocking fangs, were fully visible. "What is this?" he said, still laughing. He held the falcata up for the crowd to see. "A skinning knife. Did the humans send a cook instead of a soldier?" The hall erupted. Gorvan rumbled with deep, shaking laughter. Droshek cadets hissed their amusement. Even some of the quieter species made sounds that Riva understood were mockery, even if she could not translate them. Torvik set the blade down on the table and pushed it toward her with one finger, like it was something dirty. "Register it if you wish," he said. "It will make no difference." Riva picked up her falcata. She slid it back into its sheath without a word. Her face showed nothing, no anger, no shame, no fear. She turned and walked back through the crowd, and the laughter followed her all the way. She found her quarters on the lower ring. The room was small and plain, a hard bed, a storage locker, and a light panel on the ceiling. The walls were bare metal. It smelled like recycled air and cleaning solution. The door to the next room was open, and a chelin stood in the doorway. She was smaller than the others of her kind, with pale green chitin and large, dark eyes that blinked sideways. She watched Riva enter and set her bag down. "I am Yanara," the chelin said. Her voice was soft and clicking like small stones tapping together. "We are neighbors, it seems." Riva nodded. "Riva." Yanara hesitated, then said, "I saw what happened, in the hall with the blade master." "Everyone saw," Riva said. "Your hands," Yanara said. "They did not shake, not once." Riva looked at her. For a moment, something passed behind her eyes, not anger, but something quieter and much more patient. Then she sat down on the edge of her bed and pulled the falcata from its sheath. She reached into her bag and took out a small whetstone, flat and gray, wrapped in cloth. She pressed it against the blade and began to draw it along the edge in slow, steady strokes. The sound was thin and sharp in the quiet room. Yanara watched from the doorway, but said nothing more. Riva turned the blade slightly, and for just a moment the light caught an inscription on the inside of the hilt. Letters etched in a language Yanara did not recognize. Old letters, carved by a hand that had held this blade long before Riva was born. "Respond con acero." Answer with steel. Riva kept sharpening. The stone whispered against the edge over and over, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the station hummed. Somewhere down the corridor, alien voices laughed about the human and her little knife. She did not look up. She did not stop. The blade would be ready when it needed to be. Training at the Crucible began before dawn. A deep horn sounded through the station at what the cadets called fourth bell, and by the time the lights fully powered on, everyone was expected to be standing in the main arena in full gear. Riva was always the first one there. The schedule was simple: morning drills, afternoon bouts, evening recovery, every day without exception. The instructors did not believe in rest days. The Crucible had been running for 400 years, and in all that time, no species had ever asked for a gentler program. No one wanted to be the first. The morning drills were brutal enough on their own. Cadets ran obstacle courses that shifted under their feet. They climbed walls that changed angle without warning. They carried loads across uneven terrain while the gravity generators pulsed between light and heavy at random intervals. By the end of the first week, 3 cadets had dropped out. One had broken both legs. The medics fixed him in a day, but his mind was already gone. He shipped home on the next transport. Riva kept up, barely. Her body was not built like theirs. The Gorvan had raw strength. The Droshek had speed and armored skin. The Chelin had 4 arms and reflexes so fast they could catch a thrown blade out of the air. Riva had none of that. She had endurance, flexibility, and a tolerance for pain that confused the medical staff. After one particularly hard morning session, a Droshek medic scanned her and found microfractures in both shins. He told her to report to the recovery bay. She asked if she could still walk. He said yes. She asked if the fractures would kill her. He said no. She thanked him and walked to the afternoon bouts. The bouts were where the real learning happened. The Crucible ranked its cadets from 1 to 60 based on combat results. Ravath started at 60, dead last. She was matched against cadets in the bottom tier, and even they were stronger than her in every measurable way. Her first fight was against a Gorvan cadet named Druk. He was young for his species, which meant he was only 7.5 feet tall instead of 8. He carried a gravity hammer that could crack stone. Ravath circled him for 30 seconds looking for an opening. He gave her none. He swung once, she dodged. He swung again, she rolled. On the third swing, he caught her shoulder with the edge of the hammer's head. She heard the joint pop before she felt it. The pain came half a second later, white and blinding. She hit the ground. The bout was over. The medics reset her shoulder in the recovery bay. Biogel sealed the torn tissue. She was cleared for training the next morning. Her second fight was against a Droshek cadet who did not bother to learn her name. He hit her in the ribs with an armored elbow within the first 10 seconds. 2 ribs cracked. She tried to keep moving, but her body folded and she went down hard. Her third, fourth, and fifth fights ended the same way. Different opponents, different injuries, same result. She lost every single one. Torvik watched from the instructor's platform above the arena. After her fifth loss, he addressed the cadets. "Observe," he said, gesturing down at Riva as the medics helped her to her feet. "This is what happens when a species brings tradition instead of technology. Courage is admirable, but courage without capability is just a slow way to die." He never used her name. He called her the human, the way someone might refer to a stray animal that had wandered into the wrong building. The cadets laughed. Riva wiped blood from her lip and said nothing. But she was not just losing. She was doing something that none of them understood yet. Every night after the medics patched her up and the lights in the corridor dimmed, Riva sat on her bed with a datapad on her knees. She wrote notes. Pages and pages of notes. She sketched anatomy, the hinged joints of a Gorvan's knee, the overlapping scale pattern on a Droshek's neck, the thin membrane between a Chelin's upper and lower arms. She recorded timing, how long it took a Gorvan to complete a full swing, the exact angle a Droshek's body leaned before a lunge, the rhythm of a Chelin's footwork during a rapid exchange. She measured hesitation. She mapped aggression patterns. She cataloged every tell, every habit, every weakness she could find. Yanara found her doing this one night and stood in the doorway, watching the screen fill with notes. "What are you writing?" Yanara asked. "Lessons," Riva said. "From what?" "From losing." Yanara tilted her head, her compound eyes catching the glow of the datapad. "On my world, losing is something to forget. You move past it." Riva looked up. "On my world, we have a different idea. We call it pressure testing. You put yourself against something stronger than you, and you let it break what is weak. What survives is what you build on." "That sounds painful." "It is." "Then why do it?" Riva turned back to her notes. "Because pain is just data with feelings attached, and I am very good at reading data." Her sixth bout was different. She was matched against a Droshek cadet named Salvan. He was mid-tier, ranked somewhere around 30th. Faster than the ones she had faced before and more disciplined. The other cadets expected another quick defeat. It did not come. Riva moved differently this time. She did not charge in. She did not try to overpower him. She circled, staying just outside his range, forcing him to extend for every strike. When he lunged, she did not block. She sidestepped and let his momentum carry him half a step too far. She watched his shoulders. She watched his feet. He swung his plasma glaive in a wide arc. She ducked under it, not backward but forward, closing the distance. For 1 second, she was inside his guard, too close for his long weapon to reach her. She brought the falcata up in a short, tight slash aimed at the side of his neck where the scales were thinnest. The edge bit into the gap between two scale plates. A thin line of dark blood appeared. Salvan hissed and threw her back with a shove that sent her skidding across the arena floor. He touched his neck, looked at the blood on his clawed fingers, and his gold eyes went wide. The arena was quiet for half a second, just half a second, but Reva heard it. She heard the silence and she knew what it meant. A bottom-tier human with an unpowered blade had drawn blood from a Drashek. Salvan recovered and ended the fight 60 seconds later with a strike to her midsection that dropped her. Reva lost. Again. But when she stood up this time, the medics were not the only ones watching her. Torvik stood on the platform above, his arms folded across his armored chest. His face showed nothing, but he had stopped talking. He had stopped narrating her failures for the crowd. He just watched. Over the next 3 weeks, Reva climbed. She beat a Chellan cadet by slowing the fight down to a pace the insectoid could not handle, forcing long pauses between exchanges that disrupted the Chellan's natural rhythm. She beat a Gorvan by staying close to his body where the gravity hammer could not build momentum, turning his greatest weapon into dead weight. She adapted. Fight by fight, loss by loss, she got better. She rose from 60th to 45th, then to 34th. Cadets who had laughed at her stopped laughing. A few started watching her bouts on purpose, trying to understand how she was doing it. They could not figure it out. She was not faster. She was not stronger. She did not have better weapons or better armor. She simply learned faster than they could adjust. One evening, as Reva cleaned her blade in her quarters, Yanara leaned against the doorframe and said, "Torvik has assigned himself as your next evaluation opponent." Reva's hand paused on the whetstone, just for a moment. "When?" she asked. 3 days. Reva nodded slowly. She turned the falcata in her hand, watching the edge catch the light. She had studied Torvik's fighting style from the platform recordings. She had pages of notes on his movement, his timing, his tendencies. But studying a predator from a distance and standing in front of one were very different things. "Good," she said quietly. Yanara stared at her. "Good, he will destroy you. Instructors do not fight cadets. This is not normal." "No," Reva agreed. "It is not normal. That means he is worried." She went back to sharpening the blade. The whetstone whispered against the steel, steady and patient, the same sound it had made every night since she arrived. Reva was not ready to beat him, she knew that. But she was ready to learn what it would take. The arena was different that day. Reva noticed it the moment she stepped through the energy barrier. The temperature was higher than usual, enough to make the air shimmer near the ground. The lighting had been dropped to half, casting everything in a deep amber glow. The terrain underfoot was rough, broken rock, and uneven plates of metal that shifted when she stepped on them. Drashek conditions. Hot, dark, and unstable. Everything that favored a cold-blooded species with armored feet and eyes built for low light. She looked up at the viewing platforms. Every seat was filled. Word had spread through the station that Blademaster Torvik Jal was going to personally evaluate the human cadet. Instructors did not do this. Not normally. Not unless they had a reason. Everyone knew the reason. They just did not say it out loud. Torvik entered from the opposite side of the arena. He moved slowly, deliberately, his dark scales absorbing the amber light. He wore his full ceremonial warplate layered armor that covered his torso, shoulders, and thighs. The plates were made from a Drashek alloy called Veithstone, dense and heat-treated, designed to absorb kinetic force and scatter the energy across its surface. It could stop a plasma bolt at close range. A regular blade would bounce off it like a stick hitting a boulder. In his right hand, he carried a halberd with a plasma-tipped blade. The weapon was almost as tall as he was. The plasma edge glowed faint orange, and the air around it rippled with heat. He looked at Reva across the arena and said nothing. No jokes this time, no laughter. Reva stood in her cadet fatigues with her falcata in her right hand. No armor, no shield, no energy weapon. Just the curved steel blade and the leather-wrapped grip that had been worn smooth long before she was born. The signal sounded, the bout began. Torvik did not rush. He walked toward her with the patience of a predator that did not need to hurry. His steps were careful and measured on the broken ground. He knew the terrain. He had chosen it. Reva moved first. She came in at an angle, trying to circle to his left, where the pauldron met the chest plate. She had studied his armor in recordings for weeks. She knew there was a gap there, a thin seam where the shoulder guard connected to the torso piece. It was only exposed when he raised his weapon overhead. But knowing was not the same as reaching. Torvik swept the halberd in a low horizontal arc. The plasma edge screamed through the air. Reva jumped back, and the tip passed inches from her stomach. Before she could reset, he reversed the swing and brought the haft around in a short, brutal jab that caught her in the ribs. She stumbled sideways. The pain was sharp and immediate, like a hot spike driven between her bones. She gritted her teeth and kept moving. He was fast, faster than his size suggested, and his technique was flawless. Each strike flowed into the next with no wasted motion, no hesitation. This was not a soldier fighting. This was an artist performing. And he was performing for the crowd. "Notice the footwork," Torvik said, loud enough for the platforms to hear. He swung again and Reva ducked, the plasma edge singing over her head. The human favors lateral movement, predictable. Any competent fighter would close the angle. He closed the angle. A short step to his right, cutting off her escape route, and then a downward strike that Reva barely rolled away from. The halberd hit the ground where she had been standing and cracked the metal plate beneath it. "She relies on speed to compensate for a complete lack of stopping power," he continued, narrating as if he were teaching a class. Which, Reva realized, was exactly what he thought he was doing. She was not his opponent. She was his teaching tool. He hit her again. A controlled strike to the shoulder, hard enough to bruise deeply, not hard enough to break bone. He was being precise. He was choosing where to hurt her and how much. Reva tasted copper in her mouth. Her left arm was going numb from the shoulder hit. The heat of the arena was pulling sweat from her body, and the low light made it hard to read his movements at distance. Everything about this fight was designed to grind her down. She kept moving. For 3 minutes she circled, dodged, and absorbed hits. She got inside his range twice and swung the falcata at his torso. Both times the blade struck the Veithstone warplate and slid off with a flat, ringing sound. No damage, not even a mark. The armor was too thick, too dense. Torvik shook his head. "You see," he said to the platforms, "determination without the means to back it up. This is the lesson." He raised the halberd high for an overhead strike, the killing blow in Droshek combat tradition. It was a finishing move, meant to end the fight with authority. And for exactly 1.3 seconds, the seam beneath his left pauldron was exposed. Reva did not think. Her body moved on the pattern she had drilled 1,000 times in her quarters, alone in the dark. She dropped low, pivoted on her right foot and drove forward under the descending halberd. Her left hand grabbed the edge of his chest plate for leverage. Her right hand brought the falcata up in a tight, fast arc aimed directly at the gap. The blade connected. Steel met Veithstone at the seam where the plates overlapped. And then she was flying. Torvik's free hand caught her across the chest and launched her backward. She hit the ground hard, rolled twice, and came to a stop against the arena wall. The air left her lungs. Stars burst behind her eyes. Torvik lowered his halberd and looked down at himself. Then he looked at her, still crumpled against the wall, gasping for breath. He pressed the haft of the halberd against her chest and pinned her to the ground. Not hard, just enough to hold her there. "Evaluation concluded," he said. His voice was flat now. No amusement, no lecturing. He pulled the weapon back and walked away without offering a hand. The medics came for Riva. They lifted her onto a stretcher and carried her to the recovery bay. Biogel for the ribs, a cold compress for the shoulder, the usual repairs. But that evening, something happened that changed everything. The footage from the bout was archived in the Crucible's training database, available for any cadet to review. Combat recordings were standard. Cadets watched them to study technique and identify mistakes. Most of Riva's previous fights had been viewed a handful of times, mostly by opponents preparing to face her. This one was viewed 400 times in the first hour. The cadets were not watching the parts where Torvik hit her. They were watching the moment at the 4-minute, 32-second mark. The moment she dropped under his overhead strike, grabbed his armor, and dragged the falcata across the seam. The blow had not penetrated. It had not drawn blood. It had not cracked the V-stone. But it had left a mark. A thin, hair-fine scratch across the surface of his left pauldron. A line so faint you had to zoom in on the footage to see it. But it was there. Steel had touched V-stone, and V-stone had given way, even if only by a fraction of a millimeter. No cadet had ever marked a blade master's ceremonial armor, not in 400 years of the Crucible's existence. The warplate was supposed to be untouchable. That was the entire point of it. It represented the instructor's dominance, their separation from the cadets beneath them. Riva had scratched it with a piece of folded steel from Earth. Yanara came to the recovery bay and sat next to Riva's bed. She held up her datapad and showed her the footage, zoomed in on the scratch. "The whole station is talking about this," Yanara said. Her voice was low and excited, her mandibles clicking rapidly. "They are replaying it over and over. Even the Gorvan cadets are watching." Riva stared at the image. The scratch was tiny, meaningless in terms of actual damage, but she understood what it meant. It meant the armor was not perfect. It meant the seam was real. And it meant that with enough force, at the right angle with the right edge, the gap could be opened wider. "I need the metallurgical data on Droshek's ceremonial warplate," Riva said. "The alloy composition, the heat treatment process, the stress tolerances at the joint seams." Yanara blinked. "That information is in the Academy's engineering archive. It is not restricted, but no combat cadet has ever requested it." "I am requesting it now." Yanara studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded and left. Riva lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. Her ribs ached. Her shoulder throbbed. Her body was a map of bruises and biogel patches. But inside her mind, something had shifted. A door had opened, and behind it was a path she could see clearly for the first time. She knew the gap, she knew the timing, she knew the angle. All she needed now was the edge. Later that night, alone in her quarters, she pulled the falcata from its sheath and held it up to the light. The blade was chipped in 2 places from hitting the warplate. She ran her thumb along the edge and felt the tiny imperfections where the steel had given way. She opened the metallurgical files Yanara had sent and began to read. Alloy composition, grain structure, shear resistance at temperature. She read it all twice, and then she picked up her whetstone and began to sharpen the blade at a new angle, steeper, more precise, calculated to concentrate force along the narrowest possible line. "Now I know where the seams are," she said to the empty room. The whetstone whispered against the steel. Outside, the station turned in silence. And somewhere in his quarters, Torvik Jal ran his fingers across a scratch on his armor that should not have been there, and for the first time in a very long while, he did not sleep well. Something changed at the Crucible after the scratch. It was not loud or sudden. It was more like a shift in temperature, the kind of thing you felt before you understood it. Cadets stopped stepping aside when Riva walked through the corridors. A few began to nod at her. One Gorvan, a heavy-set cadet named Brull who had beaten her in her second week, stopped her outside the mess hall and said, "I watched the recording. The timing on that strike was clean." Then he walked away without waiting for a response, as if even that small compliment had cost him something. Reva accepted these moments without expression. She did not need their approval, but she understood what was happening. The hierarchy of the Crucible was built on dominance, and dominance was measured in results. The scratch on Torvik's armor was a result no one could ignore, no matter how small. But small was not enough, not for what she was planning. She threw herself into the bouts with a new kind of focus. Before the evaluation, she had been learning, absorbing punishment, collecting data, figuring out the patterns. Now she was applying everything she had gathered, and the results came fast. Her first real victory after the evaluation was against a Chellan cadet named Thiek. Chellan were the fastest species in the Crucible. Their forearms could deliver strikes from angles that most opponents could not track, and their reflexes were so sharp they could react to a blow before it was fully committed. Fighting a Chellan was like fighting a blur. So Reva did not fight fast, she fought slow. She entered the arena and immediately dropped her pace. She circled at a walk, holding the falcata low, barely moving. Thiek darted in and out, testing her guard, throwing quick combinations that Reva deflected or absorbed without responding. The crowd grew restless. This did not look like a fight. It looked like nothing was happening. But Reva was watching the rhythm. Chellan fought in bursts of fast in, fast out, recover, repeat. The gap between bursts was less than a second, but it was consistent, always the same length. Their nervous systems were wired for explosive speed, but they needed that tiny pause to reset. On the seventh burst, Reva was ready. Thiek came in fast with a four-armed combination aimed at her head and torso. Reva took the hits, 2 of them landed, snapping her head sideways and bruising her forearm, but she did not retreat. Instead, she stepped forward into the pause. Thiek froze just for an instant, the reset gap. Reva's falcata caught the Chellan across the upper arm, right at the thin membrane between the chitin plates. The blade cut clean and Thiek shrieked, a high, vibrating sound that made every Chellan in the audience flinch. The bout was called. Reva won. She moved up to 28th. Next came a Gorvon named Taurus. He was not as large as Brull, but he was smarter, and he had watched Reva's previous fights carefully. He kept his distance and used the reach of his gravity hammer to control the space between them. Every time Reva tried to close in, he swept the hammer in a wide arc that forced her back. Reva let him do it. For 2 full minutes she retreated over and over, letting him believe his strategy was working. He grew confident. His swings got wider. His stance got a fraction looser. On the 3rd minute, Reva stopped retreating. She waited for his next wide swing and sprinted straight at him, not to the side, not at an angle, directly forward inside the arc of the hammer where the weapon could not reach her. She was so close she could feel the heat from his body. She drove the falcata into the soft tissue behind his knee, the one joint on a Gorvon that had no bark-like armor, and twisted. Taurus went down like a falling tree. The arena shook when he hit the ground. He tried to rise, but his leg would not hold him. The bout was called. Reva won again. She climbed to 19th, then 14th, then 9th. Each fight was different. Each one required a different solution. Against a creature with thick armor, she targeted joints and soft tissue. Against a fast opponent, she controlled the tempo. Against a strong one, she used their own momentum against them. She was never the strongest fighter in the arena. She was never the fastest, but she was always the one who had done the most homework. Torvik watched every bout from the instructor's platform. His expression had changed over the weeks. The amusement was long gone. In its place was something harder and more complicated. He adjusted the training conditions against her, heavier gravity during her bouts, rougher terrain, shorter rest periods between fights. He assigned her extra endurance drills that the other cadets did not have to do. Reva completed every one without complaint. When she reached fifth in the rankings, Torvik addressed the cadets during morning assembly. "Rankings are numbers," he said. "Numbers do not reflect true combat ability. A flawed evaluation system can produce misleading results." He did not look at Raval when he said it. He did not need to. Everyone knew who he was talking about. But Commandant Saith was also paying attention. The Valori leader had been reviewing footage of Ravaz's bouts personally, something she almost never did for individual cadets. During one assembly, after Torvik had finished his remarks, Saith stood and said a single sentence. "Adaptation is the highest form of combat intelligence." She did not explain, she did not elaborate. She sat back down, but the cadets heard it and they understood. The Commandant had noticed the human and she was not dismissing her. Ravaz reached third in the rankings on a Tuesday. She had defeated a senior Droshek cadet in a bout that lasted less than 90 seconds, the fastest victory recorded that cycle. She had identified the cadet's habit of dropping his guard after a successful strike and exploited it with a counterslash that opened a cut along his jaw before he could react. That evening, Ravaz went to the Academy's records office and filed a formal request. The clerk, a bored-looking Chelan administrator, read the document and looked up at her with widening eyes. "You are invoking the Calvarath," the clerk said. "Yes." "The right of challenge, against an instructor." "Against Blademaster Torvik Jal, yes." The clerk set the document down slowly. "This has not been invoked in over 60 years. The last cadet who tried it was a Gorvan from the Second Fleet. He spent 4 months in the medical bay afterward." "I understand the risks," Ravaz said. "The rules state that an instructor cannot refuse a Calvarath if the challenge is filed on grounds of unfair evaluation. You will need to provide evidence." "I have evidence. The adjusted gravity settings during my bouts, the additional drills not assigned to other cadets, the evaluation fight conducted under species-specific conditions. It is all in the training logs." The clerk read the document again, checked the supporting data, and stamped it. "It will be presented to the Blade Master tomorrow at morning assembly. He cannot refuse." The next morning, Torvik received the challenge in front of the full academy. A ceremonial tone sounded, and the clerk read the filing aloud. The hall went absolutely silent. Torvik stood on the platform, his hands at his sides. His gold eyes found Ravaz in the crowd. She stood still, her posture straight, her hands behind her back. She did not look away. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and something passed across his face, not anger, not contempt, but something closer to recognition. He was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a joke, not as a lesson, as someone who intended to beat him. "Accepted," he said. His voice was quiet, and it carried through the silent hall like a stone dropped into still water. "The duel will take place on the final day of the training cycle." 10 days. Ravaz spent the next 9 in the Academy's metallurgy lab. Yanara found her there late on the third night, bent over a workbench under a bright lamp, the falcata disassembled before her. The blade had been removed from its handle. Beside it sat vials of chemical compound, some from the Academy's stores, some that Ravaz had synthesized herself using the engineering archive data. "What are you doing?" Yanara asked. "Finishing what my grandmother started," Ravaz said. She held up the blade. The steel was the same, dark, folded, old, but the edge was different. Under magnification, Yanara could see it. The cutting edge had been reground and coated with a new compound, a carbon nanolattice that Ravaz had designed to bond with the Terran steel at a molecular level. It was not a new material replacing the old. It was the old made sharper. The folded steel now carried an edge measured in atoms. "Will it cut Veithstone?" Yanara asked. Ravaz reassembled the blade, slid it into its handle, and tested the balance. She turned it in her hand, feeling the weight, the way it moved through the air. "It will cut anything," she said, "if I put it in the right place." She slid the falcata into its sheath and looked at Yanara. Her face was calm. Her eyes were steady. 9 days of exhaustion, preparation, and sleepless calculations had left dark circles under her eyes, but behind them burned something that was impossible to mistake. Certainty. "I am not making a new weapon," she said. "I am finishing the one my grandmother started." The final day came like a held breath finally released. The arena had been reset to neutral, standard gravity, full lighting, flat, open ground with no obstacles and no uneven terrain. The energy barriers that usually separated the combat floor from the viewing platforms had been extended higher, reaching almost to the ceiling. This was not a training bout. This was a Calvarath, a formal challenge duel, and the Crucible treated it with the gravity it deserved. Every seat in the viewing platforms was taken. Cadets lined the upper railings 3 deep. Instructors who never attended bouts stood along the back walls with their arms folded. Even the station's maintenance crews had found excuses to be in the area. Word had traveled beyond the academy itself. Officers from visiting conquered warships had requested permission to observe, and Commandant Saith had granted it. The Commandant herself sat in the central observation box, directly above the arena floor. Her white, pupil-less eyes reflected the bright lights below. She had not spoken about the duel publicly, but her presence said everything that needed saying. This mattered. Torvik entered first. He walked through the eastern gate with the unhurried pace of a creature that had never been afraid of anything in its life. His ceremonial warplate had been polished until it shone like black glass. Every plate was perfectly seated, every joint sealed tight. The scratch Rava had left weeks ago was still there. He had not repaired it. Whether that was pride or a message, no one could tell. His plasma halberd rested across his shoulders, the blade dark and cold. He would activate it when the duel began, not before. That was tradition. He reached the center of the arena and stopped. He planted the halberd's base on the ground and waited. Rava entered from the western gate. She was small against the scale of the arena. Her cadet fatigues were clean but worn. She carried nothing but the falcata at her hip, no armor, no shield, no backup weapon. She walked with even steps, her eyes forward, her breathing controlled. She stopped 10 paces from Torvik. They looked at each other. The arena was completely silent. 2,000 beings held their breath. Torvik activated his halberd. The plasma edge ignited with a low hum, glowing orange-white, and the air around it began to shimmer. He shifted his grip and brought the weapon to a ready position. Rava drew her falcata. The blade caught the overhead lights and threw a thin line of brightness across the arena floor. No glow, no hum, just steel. The signal sounded. Torvik moved first. He closed the distance in 3 long strides and brought the halberd down in a diagonal slash aimed at Rava's left shoulder. It was fast, faster than a creature his size should have been able to move, and the plasma edge left a trail of heat in the air behind it. Rava stepped right. The blade missed her by inches and she felt the heat wash across her face like an open furnace. She did not counter. She reset and circled. Torvik pressed. He drove her backward with a series of controlled strikes, horizontal sweeps, overhead chops, short jabs with the haft. Each one was precise and powerful. He was not toying with her this time. There were no lectures, no narration for the crowd. His jaw was set. His gold eyes tracked her with the focus of a hunter. Rava took 2 hits in the first minute. A glancing strike across her left forearm that split the skin and sent blood running to her fingertips. A jab to the thigh that buckled her leg for half a second before she recovered. She gritted her teeth and kept moving. She was not trying to win yet. She was building something. She circled left, then right, then left again. She varied her distance, sometimes staying far, sometimes darting close and then retreating. She threw short slashes at his armor that bounced off the Veithstone with flat, ringing sounds. None of them did damage. She knew they would not. But she was not aiming for damage. She was aiming for rhythm. Every exchange followed a pattern. Close in, strike, retreat. Close in, strike, retreat. Over and over, the same cycle, the same tempo. She let Torvik settle into it. She let him feel the predictability. She watched his body begin to anticipate the slight forward lean when he expected her to close in, the small weight shift when he prepared to counter her retreat. He thought he was reading her. He thought he understood her pattern. He was reading the pattern she had built for him. 2 minutes in, Riva was bleeding from 3 places. Her left arm was weakening. Torvik had not taken a single hit of consequence. On the platforms, some cadets were looking away. Yanara gripped the railing with all 4 hands, her mandibles clenched tight. Riva closed in again. Same angle, same timing. Torvik read it perfectly. He set his feet, raised the halberd overhead for the killing stroke, the same finishing blow he had used in the evaluation, the traditional Droshek ending, and brought it down with the full weight of his body behind it. The seam beneath his left pauldron opened. 1.3 seconds, exactly as Riva had measured, exactly as she had drilled. But this time, Riva was not where he expected her to be. Instead of retreating the pattern she had trained him to expect, she dropped. Not backward, down. Her knees bent past 90 degrees, her spine curved until her shoulders nearly touched the ground. It was a movement that no Droshek, no Gorvan, no Chelin could replicate. Their bodies were not built for it, but a human spine could flex like a bow, and human hips could rotate in ways that other species could not. The halberd passed over her, close enough to singe her hair, and then she uncoiled. She came up fast, driving off her back foot, and her left hand shot out and grabbed the lower edge of his chest plate, the same handhold she had found during the evaluation. Her fingers locked around the lip of the Veithstone, and she pulled herself in tight against his body, inside his guard, where the halberd could not reach her. Torvik reacted instantly. His free hand came around to grab her, to throw her as he had before, but Riva was already moving. She brought the falcata up. The nano-edged blade, old steel married to new science, found the gap beneath the left pauldron, and this time she did not slash. She carved. The edge bit into the Veithstone like a chisel into soft wood. Sparks erupted from the point of contact, showering across the arena floor in a cascade of white and gold. Riva dragged the blade in a controlled arc, not wild, not desperate, but deliberate. Each movement was precise, calculated, almost gentle. The falcata moved the way a pen moves across paper. She was not attacking the armor. She was writing on it. Torvik threw her. His massive hand closed around her shoulder and hurled her backward with enough force to send her tumbling across the arena floor. She rolled 3 times and came to a stop on her back, the falcata still gripped in her right hand, her chest heaving. The arena was silent. Torvik stood in the center of the floor. His halberd hung at his side. He was looking down at his chest, at the left pauldron, at the place where the human's blade had touched him. Etched into the Veithstone, cut deep into the surface of the ceremonial warplate in clean, steady lines, were 6 letters. They caught the arena lights and threw tiny reflections across the walls. CSTLLO. Not a scratch this time, not a hair-thin line that you needed magnification to see. A name, her name, cut into armor that had not been marked in 400 years, carved by a blade forged on a planet that most of the galaxy had never heard of. The silence held for 3 seconds, then 4, then 5. Yanara began to clap. It was a sharp sound, chitin striking chitin, and it rang across the quiet arena like a gunshot. 1 cadet joined, then 2, then 10. Then the entire hall erupted. Gorvan stomped their feet, shaking the platforms. Chelin beat all 4 hands together in rapid bursts. Droshek cadets hissed their approval, a sound Riva had never heard directed at her before. Even the visiting officers were on their feet. Torvik stood in the center of the storm. He ran his clawed fingers across the letters on his armor, tracing each one. His gold eyes were unreadable. His jaw was tight. Then he turned and looked at Rivet. She had pulled herself to her feet. She was bleeding from her forehead, her arm, and her thigh. Her fatigues were torn and scorched. She held the falcata at her side, its edge still bright, and she met his gaze without blinking. Torvik planted the base of his halberd on the ground. He straightened to his full height. And then, slowly, with the weight of 4 centuries of tradition pressing down on every muscle in his body, Blademaster Torvik Jal lowered his head. He bowed. The roar from the platforms became deafening. Commandant Saith stood in the observation box. She waited until the noise faded, and then she spoke, her cold voice carrying across the arena through the amplification system. In 400 years of this institution, no cadet has ever marked an instructor's ceremonial armor. Let the record show that Cadet Rivet Castillo of Earth has done what none before her have done. Her name will be entered into the Hall of Blades. She is the first of her kind to stand there. She will not be the last. The cadets erupted again. Rivet stood in the arena, surrounded by the sound, and let it wash over her. Later, long after the crowd had gone and the arena lights had dimmed, Rivet sat alone in her quarters. The medics had offered to treat her injuries immediately, but she had asked for an hour first. They had looked at her strangely but agreed. She sat on the edge of her bed and laid the falcata across her knees. The blade was still sharp. The nano-edge had held perfectly. She wiped the Veithstone dust from the steel with a soft cloth, working slowly, cleaning every inch. Then she turned the blade over and looked at the inscription inside the hilt. Her grandmother's words, etched in small, careful letters decades ago, on a different world in a different time. Respond con acero. Answer with steel. Rivet reached into her kit and pulled out a small etching tool. She held the blade steady, and beneath her grandmother's words, she carved a single line in the same careful hand. Respondi. I answered. She slid the falcata back into its sheath and set it on the bed beside her. Through the small window of her quarters, the stars turned slowly past, cold and endless and full of worlds that were only just beginning to learn what a human was capable of. Rivet closed her eyes and, for the first time since she had arrived at the Crucible, she smiled.